Welcome to meeting number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Members and witnesses participating virtually may speak in the official language of your choice, and you will see those choices at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Bracket 2, and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 17, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the rise of ideologically motivated violent extremism in Canada. And with us today, I would like to welcome witnesses: Jane Bailey, full professor, Faculty of Law, University of Ottawa; Dr. Garth Davies, Associate Director, Institute on Violence, Terrorism and Security, Simon Fraser University; and Tony McAleer, author and co-founder, Life After Hate. This is the 30-second warning to everybody. Colleagues know it well. Witnesses will get to know it well. I have leeway of 10 seconds, but no more. And if I have to cut you off, I got to cut you off. Everybody has been warned, and that's the rule of the way we manage time around here. So I would now invite Dr. Jane Bailey to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Jane Bailey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to appear before you today. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa and co-lead the Equality Project, which is a SSHRC-funded initiative that focuses on young people's experiences with privacy and equality in digitally networked environments, including experiences relating to tech-facilitated violence. Like those of you in chambers, I appear today on unceded Algonquin territory and want to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin peoples who have and continue to care for this land. You've heard and you will hear from many witnesses with specific expertise in ideologically motivated violent extremism from numerous perspectives, including psychological, security, and technological. The perspective I bring today is a more general one based on my research and policy submissions on tech-facilitated violence, including work related to internet hate speech targeting members of marginalized communities, which was initially inspired by having acted many years ago as junior co-counsel to a complainant in the first internet hate speech case to be heard by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal under the former Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. I was pleased to see the motion initiating this study aims to eventually enable government to table a comprehensive response. IMVE targeting members of marginalized communities forms part of a spectrum of hatred and violence against them. That spectrum both reflects and is reflective of a broader and complex context that is rife with social inequality and systemic oppressions. Development and implementation of a nuanced, multi-pronged national strategy is going to be essential to meaningfully addressing the complexity of IMVE and other forms of hate in a way that affirms and respects the rights of members of marginalized communities to fully participate in all aspects of public and private life, free from violence and hate. Criminal law should form only part of that strategy. Criminal law's post hoc nature and its disproportionate use against members of marginalized communities means that some will have good reason not to see criminal law or even law in general as a meaningful solution when they are targeted by hate. For this and other reasons, approaches beyond legal measures will be necessary, including proactive ones aimed at structural and systemic factors. At all costs, we must avoid solutions that do further harm to marginalized communities who are simultaneously disproportionately targeted both by hate and by discriminatory state surveillance and violence. I turn now to 7 considerations for developing a multi-pronged national strategy, prioritizing a survivor-centered, substantive equality-focused approach by 1, centering members of affected communities in policy processes like this, including women, Black, Indigenous, Jewish, and Muslim peoples, people of color, and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, to ensure that that understanding the diversity in their lived realities is prioritized in this process. It also means centering the expertise of researchers who are members of those communities, including those from disciplines outside of law, criminology, and security studies, and centering the experience of community organizations that are trusted by and serve those communities. 2, rejecting approaches that make targeted individuals and groups responsible to avoid harm, and instead focus on the responsibility of society as a whole, individual perpetrators, and the role that the underlying data in exchange for services commercial model that currently characterizes digital networks plays in shaping the environment in problematic ways. 3, better supporting marginalized community members targeted by hate through measures such as funding trusted community agencies that serve them, and with respect to tech facilitated violence, creating an administrative body that they can contact for assistance. 4, supporting proactive human rights-based educational and outreach initiatives aimed at dismantling underlying systems of discrimination and dehumanizing stereotypes that undermine marginalized community members' right to full and equal participation. 5, ensuring that the central and important goal of defending the rights of members of targeted communities does not become an excuse for unnecessary expansion of police powers and surveillance. 6, improving the responsiveness of the criminal justice system for survivors who do wish to pursue that avenue, with social context training for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges that centers principles of substantive equality. And 7, recognizing that although IMVE is part of a spectrum of violence experienced by members of marginalized communities, the complexity of IMVE and other
10
forms
seconds,
of
please.
violence on that spectrum raise unique considerations requiring tailored measures rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Thank you very much.
Look forward
Thank
to your
you.
questions.
Thank you. They're coming soon enough. I would now like to invite Dr. Garth Davies to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. The floor is yours, sir, whenever you choose to take it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I am an associate professor of criminology at Simon Fraser University and the associate director of the Institute on Violence, Terrorism, and Security. I've been researching extremism for so long now that when I began, we called it terrorism. So that's just a broad background. Ideologically motivated terrorism, or IMVE, along with organized crime and ghost guns, really are the most pressing public safety issues in Canada today. When you tie IMVE in with the transnational nature that we see, for example, in the Ottawa occupation, tie that with the anti-democratic trajectory of the extreme right, and we also have a threat to national security as well. There are numerous circumstances that are implicated and have been implicated in the rise of IMVE, which would include but are not limited to anger about globalization, unease at the speed of social change, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efforts of ideological entrepreneurs to promote IMVE, and the exacerbating and accelerating effects of the Trump presidency, which coincided with a broader international tilt towards populism and authoritarian governance. What the occupation of Ottawa demonstrated, I think, was how quickly specific issues can be subsumed into the toxic quagmire of grievances that motivate extremists. The flexibility and breadth of these narratives allow extremists to speak to and connect with a potentially massive receptive audience. Within the IMVE social ecology, law enforcement, intelligence, and national security agencies face a series of interrelated hard problems. One is the mainstreaming of extremist ideologies and the consequent normalization of hate, polarization, and othering. The second would be the weaponization of conspiracy theories and disinformation. Conspiracy theories are no longer what they once were, what we would call old school conspiracy theories that actually required some evidence. Now, innuendo or just plain fabrication, outright lies are sufficient. There is a gray area of radicalization that is becoming increasingly more important. This is personified in the story of that everyone knows about Aunt Margaret, who Aunt Margaret suddenly starts talking about the protocols of the elders of Zion, and her family members are, what the heck has happened to Aunt Margaret? And we need to understand the reach that these radicalization efforts are actually having. The central role of the internet and social media in facilitating IMVE is a central tenet of this committee, so they're well aware of that. And finally, there's a significant challenge potentially in the increasing nexus between the online and offline environments, again, as demonstrated by what happened in Ottawa. Based on my research and hard lessons over the past 20 years that we've learned collectively, I would like to offer some cautions about how Canada responds to or may respond to IMVE. The first is that it is critical to recognize that IMVE is simultaneously international, national, and local in nature. In referring to the references, the terms of reference for the committee, I'm a bit concerned that IMVE may be perceived as something that is foreign to Canada. It most assuredly is not. And we must pay attention to the made in Canadian aspects of the problem and the community-specific natures of the problem. Understand that we cannot counter emotion with facts or rationality. IMVE is based on is fueled by an emotional narrative, and it's a mistake to think that we can counter that with corrections or with statistics or simply rational talking. Funding is not a major concern here. I know it's good that we're talking about funding. I know that is a major emphasis of this, but we have to and there's an emphasis to do something, but it should not shadow over concerns, and funding is not driving, and GoFundMe and other platforms are not driving IMVE in Canada or anywhere else. We cannot rely on social media platforms and tech companies to do the heavy lifting for us. Algorithms are not magical golden bullets. They are helpful, useful tools, but much more needs to be done from our side. Nor should we want to rely on these companies. I have great concerns about Facebook or now Meta determining what I or anybody else can or cannot have access to. And finally, we should not be focused on predominantly negative measures. There will be a lot of discussion about deplatforming, about kicking groups off of the internet. We should be very wary of this if for no other reason that it actually signals to
10
these
seconds,
groups
please.
that we are afraid of them, and that we need to essentially not be afraid of these grievances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I would call upon Mr. Tony McAleer. Sir, thank you for coming, showing up in person. We get to enjoy your company. And for the next 5 minutes, you have the floor for an opening statement.
Thank you. My name is Tony McAleer. I'm the author of The Cure for Hate, a former white supremacist journey from violent extremism to radical compassion. I spent 15 years in the violent far right in Canada and the US as a follower, as a recruiter, and a leader. I left that movement in 1998 and began a journey of transformation and healing that involved over 1,000 hours of individual and group counseling with a coach and a mentor who ironically was Jewish. In 2010, I decided to help others who were where I once was and co-founded the US-based nonprofit called Life After Hate, which has helped over 700 people leave violent far-right extremist groups behind. My experience of getting into and out of these organizations and ideologies has led me to consult and advise governments of all levels over 3 continents, including 2 prime ministers, Austria and New Zealand. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. While the challenge of the rising tide of ideologically motivated violent extremism is nothing new, the speed at which ideas are spread and the recent trend of mass murders make this a dangerous global terrorist threat. We remember Anders Breivik murder of 76 people in Norway, the Christchurch Mosque massacre in New Zealand, the AME Church in Charleston, the Oak Creek Sikh Temple in Wisconsin, and the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Closer to home, the mosque shooting in Quebec City, the mass vehicular homicides in London and Toronto, the rise of anti-Asian attacks, and assorted hate crimes against Indigenous, Black, and LGBTQ2S communities create a climate of fear which tears at the fabric of our society. This is a complex problem and requires thoughtful and nuanced response. Often well-meaning but expedient solutions can cause unintended consequences and be counterproductive. The responses fall into 3 main categories: technological, law enforcement, and public health. Technology is the arena in which these ideologies are spread, the internet and social media. Again, this is a complex area, and great care must be exercised to set healthy limits to freedom of expression. In the 1990s, I operated the Canadian Liberty Net, a computer-operated messaging system that contained anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and Holocaust denial messages that was subject to a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, an injunction, and ultimately a trip to the Supreme Court of Canada. The more the hate line was suppressed, and the more callers dialed in and were drawn into the world of intolerance. At its peak, it received 300 calls per day. The court proceedings became a powerful recruiting tool, an example of unintended consequences in what has become known as the Streisand effect. Banning something makes it more popular. Policy to tackle online hate should be carefully considered to avoid overreach and the appearance of politicization to avoid this effect. On the internet, content does not necessarily go away, it goes somewhere else. Content from large platforms gets pushed onto smaller platforms that often don't have the capacity to moderate. Of the two other main responses, law enforcement and public health, the latter has the greatest gaps and opportunities, and I will focus there. By the time a person gets involved in violent extremism and appears on the radar of law enforcement, several opportunities have already been missed. While there is a growing network of providers, social workers, counselors, psychologists, for example, for interventions, a more robust effort can be made to engage and train existing resources in the community to utilize their skill set in a way they hadn't considered, creating the opportunities to intervene further upstream, long before law enforcement become involved. Training school counselors would be an example of this. Currently, based on the number of conversations I've had with several municipalities, there seems to be almost no primary prevention. Believe it or not, ideology is not the primary drive as to why people join these movements. Yes, it is a factor, but identity, belonging, a sense of meaning and purpose are far greater draws according to research. The lack of these are the result of vulnerabilities that these movements exploit. The ideology is the pill one swallows to obtain these important drivers. Research has shown that 15% of the general population has had 2 or more adverse childhood events, trauma, abandonment, neglect, for example. But of those in ideologically motivated violent extremism, 66% had 4 or more. Although trauma does not create the vulnerabilities, it is important, although trauma often creates the vulnerabilities, it's important to note that trauma is not a predictor. And there is a whole host of antisocial outcomes, addiction, for example, that are possible from these vulnerabilities, of which violent
10 seconds, please.
Violent extremism is but a small sliver and a very dangerous and harmful sliver nonetheless.
Colleagues, we now move into the first round of questioning, and to lead us off, I will call on Mr. Van Popta for a 6-minute slice of questions, sir, whenever you're ready.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here with us, and apologies again for the delay. Thank you for your patience. Professor Bailey, I'll start with you. Thank you very much for your testimony. It was very clear and concise, and thank you for that. I note from your talk and some research that I've done that you're...
No translation?
No translation.
Okay. Translators, we're not getting any signal. Is it okay now?
Good now? Okay,
Bon?
good.
Okay, let's go.
So, Professor Bailey, I know from your earlier testimony and some of what you published, and also statements that you've made at previous committees, that your focus has been on technology-facilitated violence against women and youth in particular. It's very important work. Today's study is about ideologically motivated violent extremism, and I know you did touch on that, but perhaps you could just expand on the relationship between the primary focus of your research and the study that we're undertaking today.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Sorry, apologies, I had a bit of feedback there for a second. Yes, so there certainly are connections between the work that I've been doing and IMVE. first of all, young people have at least historically been primary targets of for sort of radicalization initiatives. And in terms of sort of hateful attacks, we have only to look at, incel extremism in Canada and elsewhere in the world to understand the degree to which the women are the subjects of attack and the objects of attack of very highly violent, misogynistic, not just rhetoric, but then also physical violence. So there certainly is, obviously we cannot in this context or in any other context, whether it be child pornography or anything else, draw direct causal connections between these. I'm not trying to do that between these issues, but they certainly seem to be related to one another, and therefore are certainly a cause for concern. I also think my work with young people around related to the internet is also important because it's helped me to understand a little bit better what young people prioritize in terms of what the issues they see are and what sorts of supports and solutions that they would like to see there. And while the young people we've spoken with definitely see room for legal responses to the kind of extremist content that's the subject of this hearing, there's a whole other part of the spectrum that young people are very interested in, and I think they are concerned about and want to have other kinds of approaches to that deal more swiftly with removal of content and so forth. So that's what I would say.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for that. In your testimony, you talked about a national strategy, and you gave us 7 points, and I scribbled them down as quickly as I could. Your point number 3 was reject approaches that focus on victims having to defend themselves, and number 5, I think, was to do so without expanding police services or police powers. Now, a colleague of mine has introduced a private member's bill, which is titled Stopping Internet Sexual Exploitation. That builds on a recommendation to the ethics from a study in the Ethics Committee around MindGeek and other platforms that were using pornography without consent. And so the intent of the bill is to prohibit platforms from using pornographic material without the consent of people, and they need to be 18 years old. And here's a quote from a press release. It's time to place the burden of due diligence and corporate responsibility on companies rather than survivors and law enforcement. So what do you say about that? I'm assuming you agree with that from your testimony.
Well, I think it's complicated, as all of these issues are. So absolutely yes. I think that we have had a tendency in the past to to focus on things like, especially with young people, safety planning, how to stay safe. What is it you should do? What shouldn't you do? And less on the environment that sort of creates an ecosystem that leads to problems for young people, in particular. So I do think that we do need to be thinking beyond. We do need to teach our kids. This is the analogy I often use. We do need to teach our kids how to safely cross the road, but we also need to have rules and regulations about what people using the road are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And so I think consent is a very important component of sexual expression, whether it be posted online or not. And the one thing that the one thing that I would sort of want to emphasize is I go back to Dr. Davies.
10 seconds, please.
One of Dr. Davies' points, which is that we have to be careful about the degree to which we rely on private entities to be making these kinds of decisions for us.
Thank you very much. I would now like to turn to Ms. Demoff for her 6 minutes of questioning. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Demoff.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our witnesses. This has been a very enlightening testimony today. Mr. McAleer, you've been quite outspoken about against deprogramming for people who have fallen into extremist views. What recommendations would you give to the government to help us help people from joining these far-right extremism groups, but also to leave those groups? So what recommendations would you give to us for that?
Well, there's two aspects to that. There's what can we do before people get radicalized, and what can we do after people get radicalized. And there already is a fairly robust intervention services within the country. It obviously could be improved, and public safety is working towards that. But I think it's important that there's already existing resources in the community, whether it be social workers or psychologists or even school counselors, that have the ability to intervene in these situations, but they don't have the cultural nuance, they don't have the cultural sensitivity training to deal with that particular population. And rather than build whole programs with dedicated individuals like psychologists, I think a lot could be done with empowering local resources that already exist and giving them the training that they need to do that. On the prevention side, I think where there's a huge gap is in primary prevention. And when we talk about primary prevention, we're not talking about individuals. We're talking about addressing communities and building resilience that helps to inoculate them against so it's not ideologically specific services or programs, but they're programs which create a resilience in young people or older people so that they are less likely to be drawn in by these seductive ideologies.
So do you think there's a lack of awareness amongst these people of, for example, white supremacist movements, and not necessarily having the awareness that that could be a problem for a young person?
I think that's changing, but I think that certainly was the case. I think until the last couple of years, we were very focused on responding to ISIS and Al-Qaeda-inspired terror threats and ignored the white supremacist terror threat. But I think that's changing. But that certainly is important.
Thank you. And Ms. Bailey, you had mentioned in your testimony something about survivor-centered approach. I haven't heard that term before. How would you recommend that what kind of recommendations should our committee make to ensure that what we are doing does take that survivor-centered approach?
Thank you very much for that question, and I think it is central to my submission, and it certainly connects back to the prior question I was asked regarding the outstanding bill, which is survivor-centered approaches are approaches that take into account and center the what it is that survivors of particular kinds of violence want and need. What are the sorts of responses, remedies, solutions that they're looking for. And I can commend to you a paper by General Counsel at LEAF, Pam Hrick, that focuses on survivor-centered responses to tech-facilitated violence that is gender-based. I can provide that. I can provide that afterward. But the point is that this helps us to avoid the problem I also identified, which is developing solutions that may not just not help people, but actually may do more harm than good, particularly to the most vulnerable members of our community. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's what I mean by survivor centered.
And if you could provide that paper to the clerk, that would be terrific. Dr.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Davies, do you think the government, that we're doing enough in terms of tracking and analysis on extremism in Canada? And if not, what more should we be doing?
Thanks for the question. I think that we are not. There are, within the agencies that are tasked with doing this, there are simply not enough resources to deal with the broader picture. Many of our agencies are tasked with dealing with day-to-day threats or things that are imminent. And so in terms of analyzing data, projection of long-term consequences or potential or even potential threats coming down, we simply don't have enough resources dedicated to that. There is no there are no central databases. There's no, in terms of trying to track what kind of events. There's no central database for who are we interested in. There are attempts that are going, and there are some
10
really good work
seconds,
being
please.
done right now by Stats Canada. So more could be done. We're moving in the direction, but more to go.
I would now invite Ms. Larouche to use her 6 minutes of questioning. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Larouche.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been taking a lot of notes. Thank you to the witness for being here today. I'll begin with you, Mr. McCullough. You said that you have traveled in Austria and New Zealand. In your travels, have you encountered practices that is useful in de-radicalizing individuals?
J'ai la tête arrêtée, Monsieur Carr.
May I continue?
Parfait. Merci encore.
Thank you again for being here. Is it working? This is the English channel. This is the English channel. Mr. McKellar, thank you very much for being here. In your statement, you said that in your rehabilitation work you have traveled. You traveled to Austria and New Zealand. Can we learn from potentially promising practices applied abroad? Can we learn measures that might be useful here in Canada that would serve to fight radicalization in some groups?
We sort of try and get exit programs. Those are programs to help rehabilitate and get people to leave these groups behind, are sort of fairly new in North America. They've been running for 20 years in Europe. And I would point you to the Radicalization Awareness Network, RAN, which is part of the EU. It's an EU body which studies that, and they look at youth, schools, prisons, rehabilitation, open settings. They are a vast source of information and best practices that we could learn from.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bailey, you spoke about incels and the disproportionate impact that their actions have on women, especially those who are targets for attack, and on marginalized communities. At this time, are we doing enough to counter such movements and to counter hate online? I know that on the Status of Women Committee, we have studied the issue. The minister is looking at legislation to counter online hate.
Est-ce que Mme
Yes,
Béliveau- Oui.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Most of what the recommendations that I've made to this committee are also recommendations that I've made with respect to the discussions around online harms and the online harms bill. I think the short answer is that we don't do enough to address systemic misogyny and other intersecting forms of oppressions in this country. I think that is clear, and it leaves members of women from particular communities especially exposed to not just to online hate, but to offline hate and violence. And I really commend the idea of Dr. Davies' note is certainly consistent with the research that we've done with young people, which is to any extent that any of us have any inclination of thinking that offline and online are segregated spaces, that is just absolutely not the world in particular young people are living in. And I think in a COVID era, and even now post-COVID, the same is true for adults. So I think that we have to be doing a lot of thinking around violence, underlying systems of oppressions generally, as and not trying to focus sort of on online as if it's somehow disconnected from the rest of the problems that we already have in the world. So there is way more to be done. Absolutely.
Merci beaucoup, Mme Bailey. Monsieur.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Mr. Davis, in your opening statement, you talked about what happened during the occupation of Ottawa. In an article on radicalization, which was published last year, you also stated that the pandemic had created the perfect storm for radicalization, and then we saw what happened in Ottawa, which probably has a direct link to that. What do you mean by a perfect storm conducive to radicalization, and what can the government do to counter the scourge?
Thank you very much for reading my article. I'm so excited. By perfect storm, what I was thinking of was the far right has always had significant mechanisms or been oriented towards weaponizing any kind of opportunities, never let a good opportunity go to waste. And I'm sorry to speak about the pandemic in those terms, but that was exactly what happened with more eyes in front of computers and a more captive audience. The pandemic itself made it so the right
10 seconds, please.
was able to key on a variety of issues it always does, fear of government, etc.
Mr. McGregor, the 6-minute slot has come to you whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today and helping guide our committee through this important study. Dr. Davies, I'd like to start with you if I can. You've provided some cautions in how Canada responds to this problem. You mentioned that we can't be relying on social media platforms to be doing the heavy lifting on their own. That's become very apparent when we had both Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook, and representatives from Twitter here. And with Facebook in particular, they were trying to stress how many employees they have who are combing through posts on a daily basis looking for this stuff, and that they've got, in their opinion, a very robust terms of service. But when it came to the convoy that made its way to Ottawa, which then turned into an illegal occupation, we still had a situation where, one of the lead organizers, Pat King, was live streaming himself on Facebook, spreading all of this vitriol and very concerning messages. And still Facebook did not engage and shut him down. And I know that there are dangers with deplatforming, that it has consequences. But I guess like that's the major struggle that we have as policymakers. You know, what kind of system should we be setting up? We've had other witnesses recommend that we set up some kind of an office of an ombudsperson who has those investigative powers, who can see the social media algorithms, who's making sure that those companies are in fact following their terms of service. I mean, ultimately, you know, if you were to be a member of this committee, what would you like to see as a solid recommendation coming out of our report in how we ensure that social media platforms are governing themselves accordingly and that there is transparency and accountability to the Canadian public?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think to rephrase just a little bit, I mean, my concern is that we are even thinking in terms of what is it that we expect of them beyond simply following their, you know, as you put it, their terms of service. All of our attempts if we look at this from the perspective of the extreme right, all of these attempts essentially feed their narrative. We are essentially providing them with the fuel that they need. Every attempt to try to deplatform or to identify content that then needs to be shut down actually allows them to say, see, look, they're afraid of us. They don't want these, they don't want these ideas out there. And it also raises questions about what is the nature of discourse in a democratic society. So outside of the things that we legally can identify, like you can't call for violence, there should be no advocacy of direct violence. But in terms of your specific question, I think that we have to have more of a tolerance. And I know this is not going to be a popular opinion, and I don't like the things that I read. I live in this world of vitriol and absolutely toxic garbage. But unless it is crossing very, very definitive red lines in terms of what it's calling for violence, I have grave concerns about us trying to legislate that, and I have more concerns about requiring any of these social platform medias to start doing that. I would also caution the committee that this can be interpreted by social media in a variety of ways. We have seen, for example, from the far right, we have seen requests that their perceptions of extremism, for example, Black Lives Matters, should be deplatformed. I don't think anybody in this room would agree with that, but that is a real possibility if we start going down this road of who should and shouldn't be making decisions about what kinds of things we do and don't want to have access to.
Thank you for that. And Mr. McAleer, if you wanted to add any thoughts on that subject, but I also noticed that you didn't really have enough time to finish your opening statement. So was there anything that you wanted to conclude on? Any specific points you wanted to get on? Yeah.
Just to reiterate, these responses need to be carefully thought out and nuanced. It's a whole of society response, and we need to use a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Right, and that's what I would add. And as far as social media companies, and I've spent time in Silicon Valley, I've been to Facebook and met with Twitter and all of that for a number of years, and you know it's a very difficult problem because you move it off one platform, it doesn't disappear, it's not gone, it shows up on another platform, and each time you push it down the line, not all social media companies are based in Silicon Valley or Canada. And some of these platforms, you know, the further down the line you go, it's two guys in Poland, it's their side hustle, right? They have zero ability to moderate. So just because we can force it off one platform doesn't make it disappear. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. It's like playing whack-a-mole.
You got 10 seconds. You're giving it back. Thank you. Generosity is appreciated. We now, colleagues, move to the second round of questions, and I would invite Mr. Shipley to begin a 5-minute round. Sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll start with Mr. McAleer. Thank you for being here today, sir. I find your background and your story quite fascinating. As a former member of a white supremacist group, I would imagine you have extensive knowledge on how they generate their capital necessary to maintain an organization. Could you elaborate on some of the knowledge you have in that field?
It's changed quite a bit since then with the anonymity of the internet. The ability to raise money is very different. When I was involved, there wasn't a great deal of money in it. You know, if you were going to be involved in it, it was a good way to go broke. Having said that, I think with cryptocurrency and these different platforms and the anonymity or perception of anonymity, it's you know, the social media creates communities of everything, good or bad. And once you can find a community, then you can raise money and raise donations. It was much more difficult to find and build those communities 20, 30 years ago.
And that's actually a nice segue, thank you, into my second question about communities and a sense of belonging, because I think you touched on that theme a little bit today, and I'm intrigued by that, so I'd like to touch on it a bit more. I think you mentioned that really a lot of people who get involved in these groups are looking for a sense of belonging or a community, as we just talked about. Do you feel that any government policies from any level, if they feel like they're being pushed out of every day-to-day society, could be pushed more towards extremism if they're feeling that they're not belonging in a certain group?
Certainly. I mean, there's you know, around the world, you know, globalization has alienated people, and these are policies that are happening at a very high level. I think it's very much possible for different programs to further alienate people. I think government needs to be. It's always unintended consequences. What are the unintended consequences? And I think it's very possible for governments to increase that sense of alienation, if that's the question you're asking.
And I believe you touched on, you said you've helped personally over 700 people leave hate, so thank you for that, and that's tremendous work.
Life After Hate, not me personally. That's
Yeah,
the whole team.
Well, your whole team, your group. It's still a tremendous number, 700. It's great work. What would you say would the government could do more to incentivize people? You've obviously had great success in doing it, your group. What could government be doing more to try and help this cause?
Well, I think going back to what I'd said earlier about there's people that have the skill set to engage people that are radicalized, like social workers, psychologists and stuff that are already in society that might be better placed to, and again, the example I'll use is a school counselor who's got counseling training, you know, but might be better placed to pick up where a kid is going wrong long before it gets to the level of where law enforcement is noticing the kid is going wrong. And I think it's a very cost-effective way too, is to utilize those existing resources, and there's people in the community that know about this stuff and what's happening with people that are becoming radicalized long before government in general and law enforcement knows.
Thank you for that. I have a quick question for Mr. Davies also now. Mr. Davies, a portion of your research focuses on the links between the dark web and extremist organizations. Do you mind explaining how the dark web differs from the regular web and what makes it more effective for extremists to organize on that?
So the dark web essentially refers to that portion of the web that is not easily publicly accessible. The dark web actually constitutes about 90% of the internet. So the vast majority of the internet are as much as you see and we all see is large. So the dark web is everything from personalized systems to encoded or encrypted channels that are used. In terms of how it helps for organization, our research has found that at this point, terrorists have not been making extensive use of the dark web. Partly that it seems to be because the encryption software that we have available even commercially right now is becoming increasingly difficult to crack, and much of their communication is actually meant to be public. They're trying to recruit, they're trying to get their cause out there. So in terms of how they're communicating privately, that's a different issue. But in terms of wanting to organize, where our research has found that, in fact, the dark web has not been a significant element of that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chang, sir, over to you for 5 minutes of questioning whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for taking your time to be with us today and your expert advice. Mr. McAleer, based on your opening remarks, you saying that someone with first-hand experience in extremism, why is it so easy for white extremism, racism to be so easily ignored? And also, how easy it is for white supremacists to get away with what they do?
Well, I guess the short answer is nobody likes to look at their own flaws and their own stuff, right? It's difficult for people to acknowledge that this is happening within their group, right? It's always happening somewhere else, and so I think there's that blindness to seeing what's clearly there and open in the public, and so that blindness is exploited by these groups because they can operate and do things, and often does not attract the scrutiny that it should.
Earlier, you had mentioned in the other question about school counselor helping with the young minds, the young students, to get them to not join extremism group. What do you think about school resource officers, police officers works in high school? Is that a good program to change young minds into joining extremism group?
It shouldn't be their primary focus, but I think they should be equipped to handle it when it shows up. And like I said, it's a matter of cultural competency training. I think really school threat assessment teams, as opposed to just counselors, is probably the more accurate place where that should happen.
Thank you. So I understand that oftentimes a person's hateful ideology can become closely related to their identity. What are some of the ways your organization has been successful in changing people's perspective and steering them away from hateful ideologies?
This is going to sound counterintuitive, but, and I think Professor Davies said this earlier, these are emotional things, and we're not going to be able to necessarily go and tell a person facts, figures, to sway them. The answer is to go in through the heart, and at the core of Life After Hate's philosophy is the use of compassion. And I believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings is a mirror reflection of our own internal disconnection and dehumanization. And that the answer when we work with these people is to rehumanize them. And how do we rehumanize them? We rehumanize them through compassion. And when we're compassionate with someone, we hold a mirror up and allow them to see their own humanity reflected back at them when they can't see it on their own.
Thank you so much, Mr. McAleer. Dr. Davies, what are some of the things that people often misunderstand about hate and extremism motivated violence, and what are some of the root causes of hate and extremism in your research?
I mean, the roots are, and I think it's been said earlier, and I think Mr. McAleer talked about it, the roots of hate often don't start with hate. It starts with a sense of feeling disconnect or a lack of belonging. So these issues of identity and belonging, and then through a series of happenstances, one of the areas that you can end up in are these ecologies or these social milieus where hate is the focus of it. So I think one of the things that we misunderstand sometimes is missing the dynamic. There are, for a lot of people, they could have ended up in a variety of other social ecologies. This is where they end up, and so I think that addressing that is as much a function of how does identity and how do we do more positive identity building work and keep people and not assuming necessarily that this is about ideology per se, or that hate was the beginning foundation.
You've got 10 seconds if you have one final thought.
address these IMV priorities, then.
The question will have to linger.
Okay.
Hurry, Mr. Chang.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Okay. Ms. LaRouche, over to you for 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll begin with Mr. Davies. And I'd like to know what you feel about the new legislation in Europe about online hate, and how can we draw inspiration from that here?
I mean, there are comparable circumstances. I'm concerned again that Europe is going a bit far in what it's proposing to do, but they also have a very different context and a different history. So I guess my short answer to you would be we can pick and choose things that are relevant to us, but I would caution against a blanket adoption of those approaches. I think that they're overly inclusive.
Et Madame Bailey,
Ms. Bailey, do you also believe that the European legislation goes too far? What inspiration can we draw from it for use in Canada?
Yeah, I think that maybe there, from my perspective, there's a little more leeway than perhaps Dr. Davies sees. And the reason I say this is that we have to pay attention to to other parts of the context, right? Like when we leave content out there, who's paying? Right? It's the communities that are targeted, right? So it isn't a sort of a zero cost game, right? And so we have to think about what not doing things means for the capacity of members of marginalized communities to actually function in society and to contribute meaningfully. I also think that we have to pay attention to the fact that social media, while they're certainly not ideal to be dealing with public values, social media platforms, in fact, are making decisions about content every single day. In their terms of service, we reserve every right to them about what kinds of decisions they're going to make. And there's very little transparency and accountability on that. So it isn't as if they're not already doing this. They are. It's just that we don't know as a public, we don't have good information as a public to understand what is the basis upon which these decisions are being made. And we also have to recognize.
Thank you very much. If you can finish in 5 seconds, go ahead.
This is a business model. There's a business model at the base of this that generates hits and profile for sensationalism.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we can't ignore that.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. A 2.5-minute section, which will take us to the end of this panel. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'll direct my last question to you, Mr. McAleer. In his opening statement, Dr. Davies was talking about how we can't counter emotion with facts and statistics, and you also echoed that. And I think every member of Parliament has had that experience. When we are confronted with conspiracy theories and we try to answer, well, no, that's not true because of this and this and this, it's obviously not working as a connection. I guess in your experience, because as policymakers, and I think as the public, we want to rightly denounce the hateful ideologies that exist, but how do we do, like where's the balance between denunciation but also having that compassion for the individual who's spouting off that belief, like without othering them, right? Because obviously we want to counter their white supremacist views, the neo-Nazism, the hate they're directing against minorities. But how do we find that balance so that we're not othering them and we're finding a way to pull them out of the brink that they're in?
That's a great question. And so the challenge here is that ideology and identity become intertwined, right? And when we attack someone's ideology, we're also attacking their identity, and all the defense mechanisms come up. They either lash out or shut down. So how do you get through that? And life after hate. There's a saying: never concede, never condemn. So people say to me, "What do I say to my uncle? What do I say to Aunt Maggie? who's, you know, spouting off all this nonsense. And I said, well, do you want to be right or do you want to affect change? And if you want to be right, just tell them all the reasons why she's wrong. If you want to affect change, you listen. It's not about what you say, it's what you do and listen. And so it's that tension between we never concede our values, but we never condemn the person. The ideology is abhorrent, the activity is abhorrent, but it's still a human being. And so that it's that tension, never concede, never condemn. And for facts and figures and counter narratives, there is a place for that. For someone who's just coming across this type of information, that's an effective place to deploy that, just not on the back end.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're at the end of the second round of questioning. I'd like to apologize to the witnesses for the delay. It's the world of the bell, and we have no option but to listen to the bell and be adherent to its time constraints. But on behalf of all members of the committee and of Parliament itself, I want to thank you for being with us and sharing your expertise and your wisdom on a subject that is timely, controversial, and important for Canada. Thank you all very much. Colleagues, this will be a very quick turnaround. The clerk tells me that the next panel are basically ready. So how about 2 minutes, and we'll be back. for the second hour of testimony. It's my pleasure to welcome in this second hour Samuel Tanner, full professor, School of Criminology at the Université de Montréal. Yes?
Yes. Sorry, Chair, just a quick point of order before we get in, and thank you for the witnesses. I apologize. We're already tight on time, so I don't plan on taking a lot of time. I just wanted to know, we're being interrupted obviously a lot lately, and we can't control these issues with the bells at 11 o'clock, and it's obviously affecting our committee here. Just wanted to know going forward, if our intentions are to be sitting till 1:30 most days, and we can adjust our schedules accordingly. Sometimes, you know, we have things on, as we all do, but we have certain things with our party that require attendance around 1:30. I just wanted to know going forward what we're doing today so we can all plan our schedules accordingly.
The first thing we have to do is ask the clerk if he has permission from the House of Commons to extend our sitting time. And he has been able to do that. So we've been able to go to 1:30. So we've been able to handle a full round and then half a round of questioning. And that is presumably how we will proceed. I'm in your hands. I mean, if we have even less time than that in the future, we'll have to make other decisions. But I think so far it's worked reasonably well.
So going forward, we'll just kind of book in.
We'll go to 1:30 if we can buy the half an hour, and the clerk has been able to do that. And then we will have a fulsome conversation with witnesses if we have the extra half hour.
Okay.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Other comments on the point of order, or can we proceed? Okay. So I'll ask and to introduce Mr. Michael Mostyn, Chief Executive Officer of the National Office of the B'nai B'rith, Marvin Rotrand, National Director, League for Human Rights of the B'nai B'rith, with us as well, and Imran Ahmed, Chief Executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Welcome to all of the witnesses. You will have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Tanner. Go ahead, sir, whenever you're ready.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames, Messieurs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, thank you for the invitation. First of all, I'd like to make a few preliminary remarks on ideologically motivated extremism, or IMVE. IMVE and the radicalization process that precedes it poses a triple conundrum. Need to seek to understand what people are thinking and how they come to think what they think. And we need to understand the progression from thought to action. In order to do that, we need to assume that the physical or virtual structures in which IMVE authors evolve affect the way in which they represent their environment to themselves, and that leads them to adopt frameworks that are generally at odds with the usual socio-political reference frameworks shared by the vast majority of people. Thus, against that backdrop, access to information, the information that helps us understand our environment, as well as the transformation of the information ecosystem with the advent of social media, as well as the tools through which we access information, which are, in many cases, social media, are pivotal to the process that culminates in IMVE. I'm going to focus on the virtual sphere and the role of social media in the process. Secondly, another important aspect is the relationship between crisis, the context, uncertainty, information, social media, and ideologically motivated violent extremism. We are witnessing a large expansion of the amount of information we receive, and to make sense of it, we need to trust the sources we use. But in times of uncertainty, like a pandemic, a crisis, be it immigration or social upheaval, for example, think of the opposition to measures designed to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Mechanisms that provide trust have been shaken, and digital platforms have become tools of massive disruption, amplifying dubious or completely false messages and helping to mobilize public coordination based on the misinformation. Social media are communication and marketing tools. They are political influencers that shape public opinion by inserting not so much advertising, but rather doubt. They insert doubt create a form of off-the-rack, ready-made thinking, present ideas or easy solutions to social, health, or political crises and uncertainties that in themselves are very complex. And these solutions resonate with the people who want to be reassured and who want to feel that there is order and security around them. These activists, influencers, provide an alternative credibility, an alternative to traditional sources of legitimacy, such as traditional journalism. For example, La Meute and its Facebook page illustrate the phenomenon. This group, the Groupe La Meute, started in Quebec through a Facebook page that they set up in the fall of 2015. That was the middle of the Syrian immigration crisis. There was an influx of immigrants into Western countries, including Canada. In 2015, there was also a series of Islamist attacks, the attacks in January on Charlie Hebdo in November, and other attacks in Paris. Young people were leaving for Syria. That made the headlines in Quebec. There was a shooting at the Canadian Parliament on October 14, 2014, and there was already a feeling of insecurity. La Meute's Facebook page quickly became a forum for discussion on issues of that kind, as well as a space conducive to comments from people concerned about the situation, people who were accusing the authorities of putting people in danger through their inaction on terrorism and through their perceived inaction on the perceived Islamization of Quebec and Canada. So this ready off-the-rack thinking discourse was born. It was anti-Muslim and anti-culturalist, and it quickly found a large audience. So what we ended up with is a community of individuals at odds with the socio-political framework of reference shared by most people. And we have shown that social media do contribute to trivializing and promoting everyday racism among people. So there are fault lines within society as we know it. Thank you.
Trand, you have, among the two of you, 5 minutes for an opening comment. The floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Mostyn. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for B'nai B'rith. I'll be sharing my time with Marvin Rotrand, our National Director of the League. B'nai B'rith is Canada's oldest grassroots Jewish community organization dedicated to eradicating racism, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all of its forms, championing the rights of the marginalized while providing basic human needs for members of our community. We focus on anti-Semitism, but of course, we're concerned with all forms of discrimination. Hate is hate, whatever the source. Two quick items that I just want to mention in my statement. First of all, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran is an entity that my community and many others have been asking for years to designate as a terrorist entity. It must happen on an urgent basis. Secondly, we need to focus for IMVE and terrorism in general on a system that works. Our system is being questioned at the moment. There was a front page article in the National Post last weekend talking about Khalid Barakat. Khalid Barakat is the leader of the PFLP, that is a listed terrorist organization in Canada. Not all IMVE groups are from the right. It is a Marxist-Leninist organization. It is anti-Semitic. It is hateful. It is active. And one of its leaders is present in Canada. And Canadians are questioning, why is he here? It is strictly forbidden for members of terrorist groups to enter Canada or to obtain Canadian citizenship. And we have no answers as Canadian citizens. So we need to deal with IMVE. We need to deal with all of the causes. We need to deal with hate as hate. But at the same time, when there are serious issues with respect to members of listed terrorist organizations here in Canada, Canadians demand answers. And we need to all know that our system works and is effective, and we need to have a national strategy and undertaking to deal with this issue holistically. So I'd like to now pass on to my colleague, Mr. Rotrand.
I think you're on mute.
Hi, my name is Marvin. I understand I was on mute. My name is Marvin Rotrand. I'm a former Montreal City Councillor, now National Director of the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith Canada. Indeed, we do oppose all forms of discrimination while we concentrate on anti-Semitism as our main mission as an organization. We have existed since 1875. We recently released our audit for 2021 of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada and discovered we have reached the highest level ever recorded in the 40 years that we have been tracking anti-Semitism in Canada. One of the areas where we note a large increase is online hate. During the pandemic, we've actually experienced less in-person harassment, but online hate has exploded. In fact, the number of incidents tracked in 2021 was 2,799. The bulk of them were online incidents. There has been an increase of almost 100% in online incidents in mere 5 years. And clearly, ideologically motivated violence and hate is being advocated on Facebook, YouTube, and on podcasts. I take note of a statement that was made by the Liberal Party during the election. If re-elected, we will introduce legislation within the first 100 days to combat serious forms of harmful online content, specifically hate speech, terrorist content, content that incites violence, child sex abuse material, and the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. This would make sure that social media platforms and other online services are held accountable for the content that they host. We support this statement and we support Parliament acting upon it. We urge the update of Canada's 2019-2022 anti-racism strategy, which ends at this year. The new strategy should make hate better defined. Currently, it aims at racism, but it would point out that Jews are 1.25% of the Canadian population. And according to Statistics Canada, in 2020, 61% of all victims targeted for hate against religious minorities. We laud the Government of Canada for its Malmo pledge made by the Prime Minister in October of 2021, and we would urge Parliament in October of 2022 to renew the hopeful promises made within the Malmo pledge. One of the areas we see as necessary is increased education for Holocaust remembrance as a basis of countering Holocaust denial and distortion. We invite the Council of Canadian Education Ministers to meet to examine best practices. Education is a provincial mandate, but we invite the federal members to follow this as well, with the goal of having the provinces improve what is taught in high schools so that when students get out of school, they actually know what the Holocaust is. Thank you. I've finished for the moment, Mr. Carr.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're now ready for a full round, and that's all the time we're going to have. One full round of questions. And to lead us off, I will call on Ms. Dancho. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. My questions are for B'nai B'rith. Thank you again for being here today. Just a little bit of background. I wasn't familiar with anti-Semitism. I grew up in rural Manitoba. It wasn't something that we were really exposed to. But I later went to McGill University, and my first exposure to this was there was large, from my perspective, very angry protest for the boycott, divest, sanction movement, or whatever you'd like to call it. So that's where I first started learning about these issues, and those images of seeing those protests really stayed with me. And I know recently McGill University is in quite a bit of hot water regarding their student society. There's a news release on your website that refers to how this student society recently voted to adopt an extreme Palestine solidarity policy, which is a document that accuses Israel of engaging in settler colonial apartheid against Palestinians and commits SMU, the student society, to boycott all entities it calls complicit in this activity. And your interpretation of that is that the document is so broad that it may compel the student society to boycott virtually all Jewish clubs and associations on campuses. So I have considerable concerns with this and the impact on Jewish students, both at McGill but in all universities across Canada. And I'd just like you to comment on the impact this has on Jewish students and what this is like for them to attend university under these circumstances.
I'm going to let Michael Mostyn begin this. I'd be happy to add a few words. Has been his file.
Sure. Thank you very much. So this is absolutely something of great concern to the Jewish community, and certainly to Jewish students on campus, also to their parents. Nobody should have to go on a university campus and deal with issues other than getting a great education here in Canada. But unfortunately, Jewish students are regularly made to feel unsafe on campus in various ways. It could be by through the political process of unions, and there have been updates at McGill since then. But this is something that we note on campuses across Canada. They contact our organization, they contact other Jewish organizations, and basically, a lot of it comes down to the fact that Jews are forced to often defend themselves in the face of others proposing who and what they are and what they think because of their connection as Jews to the Jewish state of Israel. So Zionism is often treated as a dirty term on campus, and because you're Jewish or you appear to be Jewish, you may get treated with different forms of abuse. And in fact, at the University of Toronto, they had a couple of times where student unions would take the position that even kosher food, which is a religious commandment for Jews, should be negatively impacted. It shouldn't be allowed if you hold a certain political ideology, that of Zionism. Zionism, of course, something that in the high 90% of Jews in Canada are Zionists. That is the overall connection between our communities. So it is something that's disturbing. BDS, we consider
if I can just,
anti-Semitic.
Sorry to interrupt, but just on that point, actually, in 2017, a member of the SMU's, the Student Society's Legislative Council and Board of Directors, as you put it on your website, infamously told Twitter, and I actually remember this, to punch a Zionist today, quote. Is that something that your students experience? Is there violence they're experiencing?
We do get reports of threats, rarely actual violence on campus, but we do get reports of threat. But we should all be worried. This year's audit revealed the number of violent incidents against Jews in Canada went up from 9 in 2020 to 75 in 2021, a 733% increase. While at McGill, the Board of Trustees annulled the Student Society motion, clearly, there's been a movement at certain campuses to make anti-Semitism the new form of, anti-Zionism the new form of anti-Semitism, denying the rights of Jews to self-determination in their historic homeland, and basically attacking Jews everywhere for decisions made by Israel. I'd like to say that in 2016, you may recall, Parliament passed an anti-BDS motion. We think a parliament might want to update that. In Germany and Austria and certain countries, advocating BDS is actually illegal. In Canada, the motion adopted by parliament had no legal force.
Thank you. I did want to ask you in terms of the impact, if you think that there's a connection between these movements on university campuses and protests that we see in support of the BDS movement. For example, in Toronto, as I'm sure you're aware, recently there was a large protest within from the BDS perspective. They were chanting things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and that's in reference to a one-state solution. So can you comment if you think that there is a connection between these elements that are happening on university campuses and these extremist, hateful, the rhetoric that we're seeing in many of these protests in Toronto and elsewhere?
I do.
We both do. And that is how it's felt generally within the Jewish community. We've been, as a community, complaining for years, if this is allowed on campus, if you are allowed to discriminate, and if universities are not enforcing their own policies to protect their students and their faculty and their administrations, then eventually we will see spillover into general society.
Thank you.
We saw that happen.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but with my thank you. With my last 15 seconds, can you just, in sum, what role does government play in addressing this issue? And in 15 seconds. Thank you.
Canada has to support the two-state solution as it has done, recently reiterating that Canada has to denounce efforts to portray Israel as an apartheid state, and Canada has to push for democratic expression in Palestine to allow the Palestinian people to finally have voices that represent them.
And implement IRA.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, we have to move back into the agenda. I inadvertently forgot to give Mr. Ahmed his 5 minutes of opening comments. So back to you, sir. My apologies. You've got 5 minutes, starting whenever you begin.
Good afternoon. It's Ahmed, by the way. The Center for Countering Digital Hate is a non-profit that seeks to disrupt the monetized architecture of online hate and misinformation, which has been overwhelming Enlightenment values of tolerance, of science, of democracy that underpin our nation's prosperity. Our organization's been around for 6 years. We have around 20 staff in London and Washington, D.C. We're independent. We're not affiliated to any political party. We don't take money from governments or from technology companies. Our research throughout that 6 years has tracked the rise of online hate, including of anti-Semitism, which was actually the reason we started this organization, seeing the rise of virulent anti-Semitism on the left in the United Kingdom and disinformation, and shown that fringe actors, from anti-vaxxers to misogynist incels to racists such as white supremacists and jihadists, are able to easily exploit the digital platforms who promote their content. The platforms and search engines benefit commercially from this system. And that's one of the central insights of CCDH, is that there is an economy, there's an industry around hate and misinformation now that is so profitable that it inherently leads to the sustainability and further proliferation of this industry. And that platforms are not incentivized to do more than send a press release when problems are raised. Put simply, our problems are threefold. One is the proliferation of bad actors, extremists who are sharing dangerous misinformation and hate content online. They're organized, they're skilled in exploiting platform structures and undermining public safety and democracy. Bad platforms that profit from the spread of extreme content through a system that promotes engagement over any other metric, including public good, safety, anything else. Companies that do not factor in public safety in the design of their products and do not effectively self-regulate through adequately resourcing the enforcement of their own rules. And bad laws, the absence of legislation and global coordination at a scale which will protect citizens through setting and enforcing common standards and sharing intelligence and metrics about them. We've published a series of reports on things like anti-Semitism. Our most recent was on anti-Muslim hate. It showed that even when you report anti-Muslim hate to platforms using their own tools, 9 out of 10 times they fail to take it down. That includes posts promoting the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, violating pledges that they made in the wake of the 2019 Christchurch mosque attacks, and signing up when they signed up to the Christchurch call. That conspiracy theory inspired the Christchurch attacks, but also the Tree of Life synagogue attacks in Pennsylvania in the United States. So there are commercial hate and disinformation actors who are making a lot of money from spreading discord and peddling lies. I've used anti-Muslim hate as an example, but we found the same sort of figures with anti-Semitism, with misogyny, with anti-Black hateful content in the past. And why are they failing to act? The truth is that there is a web of commercial actors, from platforms to payment processors to people who provide advertising technology that is embedded on hateful content, giving the authors of that hateful content money for every eyeball they can attract to it, that benefit from hate and misinformation. It's got revenues in the millions, the high millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that has made some entrepreneurs in this space extremely wealthy. For example, the leading anti-vaxxer in the United States, Joe McCullough, claims in court testimony that he's worth $100 million. That's what this industry is worth. The creation of this industry has involved a series of moral choices by companies to profit from this hate. To back this up, these greedy, selfish, and frankly lazy companies have proselytized the notion that their right to profit from hate without criticism, without boycotts, without regulatory action, without even opprobrium, moral opprobrium, justifiable moral opprobrium, is somehow a God-given right, because a violation of it, they say, would be canceling them, which is nonsense. Our experience as an organization suggests that 4 things are missing from existing powers globally. 1, safety by design being enforced. 2nd, the power to compel transparency around algorithms, around enforcement of community standards, and of the economics. We need bodies to hold companies accountable and set standards so that we don't have a race to the bottom morally. And finally, we need the power to hold responsible social media platforms and executives for the decisions they take.
Thank you very much. And again, apologies for overlooking you, Mr. Ahmed. We would now move back to the rota of questioning. And I would ask Mr. Zuberi to begin a 6-minute slot. Go ahead when you're ready, Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today and your testimony. It's very insightful and important. I'd like to start off with Mr. Ahmed, if you can. I think what you just shared with us is really insightful and interesting. If you can talk about, are you aware of legislation that we are now having discussing within our parliament here around online hate? Are you aware of that legislation at all? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not. And you know, the request to have me appear was last minute, but I am very familiar with the international efforts on this, and I know that we are actually organising a conference in Washington in 2 weeks' time, at which we've invited your colleagues to attend to talk about global alignment on a set of standards by which we would analyze the effectiveness of any legislation. If I might, can I just lay out very simply what those standards are? Because I think it will help to give you the insight that you need as to whether or not the legislation that you're proposing meets those standards. One is forcing safety by design. At the moment, companies can act in a profoundly negligent way in designing their systems. And in the UK, for example, and in the US, there's a big push for ensuring that there is safety by design for children, but there is no reason why that should not be extended to adults as well. Second, transparency. So the transparency of how the algorithms work, what their outputs are, transparency of the economics, because let's not forget, 98% of Meta's revenues come from advertising. There is a reason why content is structured the way that it is. It's structured the way that it is to maximize advertising opportunities, and understanding those economics is absolutely vital. And finally, the enforcement decisions. Why do they decide to take down one piece of content and not another, or to leave one up when they've taken down similar content? And understanding those enforcement decisions. Thirdly, accountability. So are there bodies setting the standards and also doing independent analysis of the effectiveness of that work? And that's a space where you're looking for public-private partnerships, because of course not all of that can be done by the state. And finally, some mechanisms for responsibility. So whether that is through civil litigation or through criminal responsibility for companies and the executives, when they create negative externalities which have a cost paid in lives, some of that cost should be borne by the companies themselves economically to disincentivize the production of harm. So have you got proper mechanisms for responsibility to disincentivize the production of harms in the first instance? That's our safety, transparency, accountability, responsibility platform that we're encouraging countries around the world to analyze their overall regulatory package by.
Thank you for that. I'd like to shift gears. J'aimerais poser une question à Mr. Tanner.
I have a question for Mr. Tanner.
A publication called The Process of Radicalization, Right-Wing Skinheads in Quebec. And you mentioned there that that you're identifying mechanisms that shape pathways towards extremism and violence. Est-ce que vous pouvez commenter sur cette...
Could you please comment on that? Yes, of course, and thank you for the question. What we had seen in that report, which dates back to 2014, well, what we were trying to do was draw up an initial picture of the far right in Quebec. What we had seen through the profiles we had found through open sources, and after that we were also able to conduct interviews with people who had in one way or another taken part in extreme right-related groups and activities. Well, those were the results. We had observed that the people in question were looking for meaning and found opportunities for meeting. They were interested in more ideological content associated with immigration and the protection of white supremacy. What we observed was that, in fact, there was a kind of radicalization happening. People would become interested in a group, would see that within the group people drank a lot of alcohol and engaged in violence, and then would move to groups that were increasingly ideologically radicalized and thus were more congruent with the extremist aspects of their ideas. I hope that answers your question.
I think that's really insightful. I like to just highlight what Mr. Ahmed mentioned around algorithms being manifest when it comes to social media platforms. I think that's really important. In the last 30 seconds, I'd like to shift to Mr. Rotrand and just your thoughts and comments on us as a federal government investing in the Holocaust Museum in Montreal, the new one, to the tune of $20 million, and how that will help to educate Canadians and Montrealers around anti-Semitism and the Holocaust in particular. You're on mute, Mr. Rotrand.
Thank you. We certainly welcome any investment that promotes Holocaust remembrance, but we would also very much like to see an improvement in school curriculums, particularly at the high school level as well. We'd like to see the broadening of the mandate of the special envoy preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, who is the Honorable Erwin Kotler, who was just recently named and whose mandate includes preserving the Holocaust.
Thank you very much. Now I would invite Ms. Larouche to begin her 6-minute slot of questioning, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us. I will try to address a question to each one of you. Mr. Ahmed, during the pandemic, you did succeed in identifying a group of super spreaders of misinformation and fake news who were actually human. 65% of anti-vax messages came from them. Those messages were posted on Facebook and Twitter in February and March 2011. Can you please explain how you went about identifying them and whether they were disclosed to the platform, and did the platforms do anything?
On March the 24th, 2021, we issued our report, The Disinformation Dozen, which showed that 12 super spreaders of disinformation were responsible for 65% of the content shared on social media that was undermining confidence in the vaccine. Now, that might sound extraordinary that 12 people can be responsible for so much of the disinformation, but it's because they're not just individuals. They're often they're 501c3s, they're limited companies that have a front person that are producing the highest quality material. And if you think about the impact that just one British man, Andrew Wakefield, had on take-up of the MMR vaccine, it then becomes understandable that a small number of highly motivated, highly talented spreaders of misinformation are able to cause so much damage. This is what happened with that. On the same day the report came out, Mark Zuckerberg was in front of the House Energy and Commerce Committee in the US Congress. He said that he would take action on it. The president asked him in June, said, look, these people are killers. You've got to take action. Think about if your relative was one of the people receiving this misinformation. Even then, only 50% of their accounts and their followers have been taken down. With the example of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Meta took down one of his accounts on Instagram, but not the accounts on Facebook, which is an extraordinary failure. And so what we've seen is piecemeal enforcement, even when there are identifiable super spreaders of harm, who of course are not just super spreaders of harm, they're super violators of their own community standards. And it just goes to show they're more addicted to the profits that come with attention than they are to doing the right thing.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Tanner, as part of your research, you've taken an interest in the way in which social media influence police practices. Have you seen social media influencers have an impact on the fight against violent extremism? Thank you for the question. Our research has not focused immediately with any immediacy on how police use social media to fight violent extremism. but more on how social media take part in making problem speech more visible. So I'm not comfortable with answering the question for those reasons.
No problem, Monsieur Tanner.
No problem, Mr. Tanner. I have a question for Bené Bríth. You said that you are waiting for the bill to counter online hate speech, and you believe it should include a number of provisions. What provisions would you like to see to make it as effective as possible?
Sir, you're on mute.
Okay. Madame, merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. We believe that it's very important to strike a balance between freedom of speech and the security of religious and racial minorities in Canada.
Reflect what Mr. Ahmed said. Aligning international standards would certainly help, because what we're seeing is the same debate just about everywhere, where powerful new technologies have outstripped the capacity of our laws to regulate hate online. And the numbers that we're seeing in our audit mushroom every single year. We would like to see, clearly a way to have the companies brought into the process where they have a responsibility within a reasonable amount of time, not only to take down hateful literature, but to find a way to modify their algorithms. It's not an area that I'm personally an expert on, but we can see on a daily basis that we are getting more and more complaints from our community about what's online and how that leads to vandalism and violence in our streets aimed at Jews.
And one of the recommendations that we've made in the past with respect to online hate as well is a trusted flagger program, so that organizations can have the ability to perhaps flag certain issues when they are racist or hateful, because it's a great frustration for anyone interested in making the internet a safer space, because it's impossible to get through to any of these platforms.
7 seconds. Good luck.
Merci encore aux témoins d'avoir.
Thank you to the witnesses for being here today.
Okay, and finally, I will turn to Mr. McGregor. Sir, you have 6 minutes to take us to the end of the questioning of this round and of this panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ahmed, I would like to start with you. In our previous panel, we had witnesses who both said that we can't rely on social media platforms to do the heavy lifting on their own, but also that deplatforming has consequences. In that, some of these actors, by deplatforming them, you could spread them onto other platforms which are not as carefully regulated. There has been an explosion in alternative social media platforms for that very reason. I guess this is the struggle we have as policymakers in, how do we effectively, because it can be like playing the game whack-a-mole. You try and knock someone off of one platform and they pop up on another. In your organization's experience, how do you approach that problem, and do you have any recommendations for our committee?
Well, let me first start by saying that it is vital that deplatforming is a tool available to platforms to remove harms from there, because deplatforming is a vital part of the overall cleaning up of the infrastructure, but also to make sure the outputs of their algorithms aren't malignant. And it's the algorithmic amplification of bad actors, the fact that they are given access to enormous audiences and they're amplified. Look, one of our research reports, Malgorithm, looked at the way the algorithm works on Instagram. It showed that if you follow wellness, the algorithm was feeding you anti-vax content. If you follow anti-vax content, it was feeding you anti-Semitic content and QAnon content. It knows that some people are vulnerable to misinformation and conspiracy theories, and that conspiracy theories, because of the psychology of them, that they're driven by epistemic anxiety, but they never sate that epistemic anxiety, they lead to rabbit holing. And so it was driving people deeper and deeper into warrens of conspiracy theories. Why? Because the commercial imperative is simple. Where do you find conspiracy theories? On social media platforms, because they are the least regulated spaces in terms of quality control that you've got for mass publishing of content. So deplatforming these people and putting them into their own little hole, a little hole of anti-Semites, anti-vaxxers, and general lunatics is a good thing, because actually you limit their capacity to infect other people, but also for trends such as convergence and hybridization of ideologies. I went to an anti-vax rally in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. Standing there was, members of the Kennedy family, QAnon, anti-Semites, Proud Boys, and kooky hippies who smoke ayahuasca. It's just an entire sort of mix of people that's driven by social media convergence. And so it is vital that they are deplatforming people so that we don't end up with the kind of problems that you also faced in Canada a few months ago.
I'd like to turn to B'nai B'rith, Canada, and to Mr. Mostyn. In our previous panel, we had a former white supremacist, who was able to reform himself and now leads an organization that is dedicated to really helping people in the white supremacist movement come out of that. And, I asked him earlier about, the struggle we have where on the one hand, we as the public want to denounce hateful ideologies like white supremacy, neo-Nazism. But on the other hand, we also, there's a struggle with trying to show compassion and trying to bring those people out of those movements. And Mr. McAleer, our witness, was identifying how ideology was so intertwined with a person's sense of self. Has B'nai B'rith had any valuable experience in speaking with reformed members from white supremacist movements? And is there anything that your organization has learned from that would be helpful for our committee to know?
I think that in general, because those are some excellent points, and there's been some great de-radicalization programs that have been used in Canada and abroad to deal with a variety of those radicalized in different ways. Sometimes it's religiously based radicalization. Just like in the criminal justice system, our system of justice has to be able to identify those who can be de-radicalized and those who cannot. We have different sorts of ideas that come into sentencing within our criminal justice system. So there has to be de-radicalization programs available for those from the far right. If we don't want it to spread, then people have to be given the ability to be educated. And it's very difficult, as you mentioned, to educate those who believe so strongly that their way is right. In fact, they are so right that they are willing to perhaps engage in violence against those who see things in a different way. So our recommendation would be to not separate out hate from different ideologies. Hate needs to be treated as hate, but overall it needs to be treated as through the lens of public safety. Are these criminal issues we're talking about? Are these terrorist issues we're talking about? Or are these opinions, perhaps very strongly held opinions, that are not criminal, and that this is and there's ways to get this out. People had disgusting things to say far before the internet. The white supremacists used to slap these flyers onto people's cars. The internet is allowing folks to speak longer, and like Mr. Ahmed said earlier, there's nothing wrong with limiting their ability to spread hate.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of this panel. I'd like to thank the witnesses for your patience. Apologies for the late start. It's the moment of this parliamentary session that we have to contend with. You've been patient, and your testimony has been important and enlightening. And on behalf of members of this committee and all parliamentarians, I want to thank you for helping us understand these complex issues. Colleagues, that's it for today. Everybody have a good weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday. Meeting adjourned.